Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Reischauer Center and to our panel on AUKUS and the Indo Pacific. I'm your host, Dave Shear. On September 15th, President Biden, Australian Prime Minister Morrison, and UK Prime Minister Johnson announced the establishment of a new trilateral security cooperation mechanism called AUKUS. The most talked about aspect of AUKUS, of course, has been the trilateral agreement to cooperate in the provision of US and UK nuclear submarine technology and assistance to Australia in connection with its effort to field a new generation of Australian attack submarines. But the AUKUS agreement goes well beyond attack submarines. It encompasses a broad range of cooperative activities, including deeper integration of the three countries' defense-related science and technology efforts, our supply chains, and our defense industrial bases. AUKUS fits into an even broader expansion of US defense and diplomatic cooperation with Australia and the UK in the Indo-Pacific region. This expansion includes the enhancement of our force posture initiative with Australia, among other things, and bilateral operations with the UK's HMS Queen Elizabeth Strike Group in the Western Pacific. Joining us tonight to discuss the substance of AUKUS and its implications for the region is a distinguished panel, including Mr. Ashley Townsend, Director of Foreign Policy and Defense at the University of Sydney's United States Studies Center, Dr. Alessio Patalano, Professor of War and Strategy in East Asia at the Department of War Studies, King's College London, Ambassador Keng Yong, Executive Deputy Chairman of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and Dr. Thomas Fingar, Shorenstein APARC Fellow at Stanford University's Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies and one of my longtime China gurus. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And what I'd like to do is invite each of you to speak for 7 or 8 minutes. After each of you has finished, I'll engage you for a couple of minutes and then move to the next speaker. And when we're all done with that, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. And the audience can submit questions by using the Q&A function on your Zoom. I'll moderate the Q's and A's, and I hope we'll have an interesting and enlivening evening tonight talking about AUKUS. With that, I'd like to further introduce Mr. Ashley Townsend. As I said, Ash is Director of the Foreign Policy and Director of Foreign Policy and Defense at United States Studies Center in Sydney. Ash is also the founding convener and co-chair of the US-Australia Indo-Pacific Deterrence Dialogue and a lecturer in the center's postgraduate program. He completed his studies at the University of Oxford, Peking University, Sciences Po in Paris, and the University of Sydney. So I can't think of anyone better qualified to talk about the Australian perspective on AUKUS. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to you, Ash. Thank you.
Dave, thanks very much for the kind introduction, and it's an honor to be here on such a distinguished panel today. I wanted to sort of tease out the three things that happened more or less at the same time on that really busy 48 hours on the 16th and 17th, or 17th and 18th of September, if you're looking at it from Washington, because AUKUS and the submarine agreement or proposed agreement between Australia, the UK, and the United States, and the Australia-US expansion of force posture initiatives with a submarine component likely to be involved in those. While they're all entangled, they are actually quite different. And I think they shine a different light on what AUKUS is and what AUKUS isn't, and why it's being pursued and what we can hope to get out of that particular arrangement, as well as the strengthening of ties between our three countries. So first, to the AUKUS announcement itself, people could be forgiven for thinking, with all the pomp and ceremony of flags at prime time, television time in Washington, DC, with the three leaders speaking and talking about a forever partnership, that AUKUS was a new alliance, that it was somehow about these three countries if you like, the closest three of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing partnership, that these three countries were somehow embarking on a new kind of strategic policy alignment or alliance relationship, which of course is not the case. AUKUS is not an alliance. It's not even about the coordination of foreign and defense policy in the field, so to speak. What it really is a high-level MOU between three leaders to do with much greater urgency something which we're already doing together, which is to share sensitive and advanced defense technology, innovation, R&D, technical know-how amongst each other in order to develop more potent, effective, cutting-edge military capabilities with a direct application for the kind of Indo Pacific strategic environment that we're entering. And viewed that way, one could argue that AUKUS is really building on the past rather than a fundamental break from the past, at least as a defense technology sharing arrangement. Back in 2017, the US Congress determined that it would bring Australia and the United Kingdom into the United States National Technology and Industrial Base. And that was an effort that was designed to bring the innovation, the IP, the research and development of Britain and Australia into, if you like, US programs of record, and to have a much more effective two-way sharing arrangement of defense technology between our three countries. But it's been a project that hasn't really succeeded. The ability of the NTIB expansion to break down ITAR and export control barriers that restrict the trade of sensitive technology, or the inclusion of Australian or British technology into, as much as possible, US programs of record, hasn't proceeded as quickly as we might have liked it to. And AUKUS provides a new opportunity to kickstart that process with the kind of political leadership at the most senior level that frankly hasn't been there for the NTIB expansion, and which certainly from an Australian perspective, we now expect and hope will be there when Australia seeks to use the AUKUS arrangement, or that framework for coordination amongst defense technology and innovation in areas quite apart from submarines. And those areas, at least in the first instance, will be cybersecurity. There'll be artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, quantum, and other undersea capabilities. All of these areas where in the short term, at least in the balance of this decade, Australia, with the support of the US and the UK, will be able to develop but also field much more innovative and cutting edge technologies to respond to the deteriorating strategic environment. So that's AUKUS, the framework. AUKUS, the nuclear powered submarine deal, is the first project, if you like, through AUKUS, and may well and will need to be governed by a treaty, that is to say, an intergovernmental arrangement between the United States, Britain, and Australia, whereby the larger two powers in that arrangement, Britain and the United States, will, if you like, be granted permission in a sovereign sense to share nuclear propulsion technology with Australia. The 58 treaty between the US and the UK provided the basis for the UK receiving US nuclear propulsion technology. And therefore, if the Brits are to have a role, as we hope and understand that they will, in the production and the development of an Australian nuclear powered submarine, then the United States needs to provide a legal framework for that kind of sensitive technology sharing and know-how when it comes to nuclear propulsion. There's been a lot of talk about, why Australia broke the deal with France, or at least exercised its right under the contract to exit the deal. But it was the worst kept secret in Canberra for the last few years that the submarines that we were purchasing from France, that is to say, conventionally powered diesel electric submarines, were not optimum for the strategic environment which the region now finds itself in. And in fact, when the deal to pursue those French submarines was made in 2016, on the back of a 2016 defense white paper, which was reasonably optimistic, that defense white paper itself, from an Australian perspective, that we released then, was more or less outdated within 12 months. And you saw last year Australia release its 2020 Defence Strategic Update, which was much more pessimistic about the strategic environment, which pointed to the significant likelihood that Australia would find itself needing to not just shape the regional strategic environment, but deter and respond to high-end, high-intensity military threats, both by itself as well as in coalitions with like-minded partners and in its alliance with the United States. So Australia has doubled down on its effort to build and seek a whole range of more advanced technologies and capabilities, nuclear-powered submarines being stealthier, having greater endurance and greater range, being able to remain on station far from their likely home port in Western Australia for long periods of time will make them a far more formidable asset for the ADF field. But we're still talking about a good 10 years, if not something a lot longer than that, before they will be in the order of battle. And finally, to finish on the force posture initiatives that were announced by the US and Australia the day after AUKUS, and have kind of been, lost in the mix or confused with the AUKUS arrangement itself. They single out what I think is the most significant expansion of US-Australia bilateral force posture arrangements in a decade. But again, they point to a long-standing effort in Australian defence policy to support the strongest possible US forward presence in Asia in a military sense, in a whole of government sense, and in this particular aspect, in a force posture sense. The two countries have agreed to expand air, land, and sea posture initiatives, complementing the existing detachment on a rotational basis of US Marines in Darwin, as well as the use of Northern Australian airfields for enhanced air cooperation between the two countries. They complement this by adding a maritime component, which we expect to be a naval component, both surface and subsurface elements, which will provide potentially the basis for training for rotational presence and pooling and teaming at a personnel level of Australian, British and American submariners as we begin to develop and train Australia's Navy to operate these sophisticated assets. But perhaps the most important part of that new set of force posture initiatives was the agreement to set up a combined, that is to say, dual flagged logistics, sustainment and maintenance capability here in Australia that would be expressly designed about supporting US military operations in the Indo Pacific. And really, this is the first time that an OSMIN communique has so directly singled out the efforts by both countries to not just strengthen posture, but to strengthen posture for clear operational and strategic utility in Australia. And I think that that underscores really everything that I've just said. Australia is looking to buy more advanced capabilities. It's looking to pool its capacity to acquire highly advanced systems and to develop the best systems with 3 trusted countries. It's strengthening its alliance in the process, and it's being empowered by the United States as well as Britain to be one of the few countries in possession of nuclear propulsion submarines at some date in the future.
Thank you very much, Ash. I'd urge everyone in our audience to not only consult with the statement issued in connection with AUKUS on September 15th, but on September 16th, the US-Australia 2+2 issued a much lengthier and detailed statement along the lines that Ash just described. And it's really, and the extent of our cooperation is really quite extraordinary. And I was gratified to see that build on what we've been doing over the past several years. Ash, I'm just wondering, this clearly further enmeshes US and Australian defense capabilities and operations. And I'm wondering if there's concern in Australia that this will inextricably enmesh Australia in American regional strategy in ways that will reduce rather than increase your flexibility.
There's certainly been a debate here since the AUKUS arrangement in particular around how much sovereign control will Australia have over its submarines? And the debate's really focused on submarines rather than everything else, which is perhaps where the enmeshment is happening more quickly, at least in the first instance. But there's been a debate around whether or not we'll be able to exercise and operate our submarines independently of US or British support as and when we need. There's been less discussion here about the way that we might find ourselves drawn or compelled to be drawn into a US coalition-led operation, perhaps a war in Taiwan or something like that elsewhere in the region because of our development of nuclear power with the AUKUS countries. But some have made that point here in Australia. I think a couple of things are worth bearing in mind here. First, the AUKUS agreement in both the defence industrial cooperation sense, as well as in the nuclear propulsion submarine deal specifically, has bipartisan political support. The Labor Party opposition, the coalition government are both on the same page when it comes to this. There are, of course, conditions for that bipartisan support in the form of, safe nuclear stewardship and so forth. But those are conditions which the government has essentially also set for itself, and so there is broad agreement there. Secondly, it is not new to say that Australia will be dependent on the United States or US military technology when it comes to the ADF capabilities. The Australian Defence Force is extremely dependent on the United States and certainly on foreign sourced technology as it currently stands. We can't service jet engines in this country. They're maintained and sustained elsewhere. So if we want an Air Force capability that is wholly sovereign, we would have to graft into this country an aeronautical engineering industry, which is just not viable. Likewise, for the mission data that advanced military systems require, that being also US owned, and really you can point to pretty much any capability that Australia has and find a degree of foreign exposure and a high degree of US exposure. In my mind, the Australia is not at risk of itself being held hostage to US technology or US and British technology in this instance for two reasons. One, in the vast majority of cases, there is a great alignment of interest between Australia and the United States in the kind of high-end scenarios that some people point to, where Washington might want Australia to play a role. If we're talking about a contingency over Taiwan or a contingency in the South China Sea, it's not really conceivable to imagine that Australia wouldn't be involved in those anyway. So in a sense, that's a moot point. Of course, the nature of our involvement is up to Australian decision makers in negotiation with those that are pulling together the military coalition, as has always been the case. And that's a process that would obviously take place in a particular context of a particular scenario, but that Australia would be involved in those is really not in question. The second reason I think that this sort of kind of misses the point is that there's a long literature on why the United States has sought not to proliferate advanced military technologies, exquisite military technologies, or indeed nuclear weapons to its allies over the years. And that is because the United States recognizes that with greater capabilities, the leverage that the United States has over its allies actually decreases, doesn't increase. So that being the case, giving Australia or supporting Australia in its pursuit of, long-range strike weapons, nuclear-powered submarines, and so forth, is actually a sign of the trust that the United States has in Australia and in Australian decision-making, the confidence that Washington has that Australia is not going to draw it into a crisis that the United States would have to then intervene in order to restore the peace. And in fact, I think that the confidence that Washington has that Australia and the United States will consult together as per the ANZUS Treaty when it comes to planning for military operations and strategic, response to strategic crises in the region.
Thanks, Ash. And I think the extent to which AUKUS really exemplifies the level of trust among the US, Australia, and UK is really quite extraordinary, and something I noticed during my tenure as Assistant Secretary and previously during my career as an American diplomat. So this certainly is an example of the extent to which trust affects diplomacy and security strategy as well. I'd like to turn now for a UK perspective on AUKUS to Dr. Alessio Patalano, Professor of War and Strategy in East Asia at the Department of War Studies, King's College, as I noted in my earlier introductory remarks. Professor Patalano is a senior fellow at the Policy Exchange think tank and at the Royal United Services Institute as well, where I think we met first in 2016. It's good to see you again. Dr. Patalano is the author of Post-War Japan as a Sea Power, and his recent book is titled Maritime Strategy and Naval Innovation in the Age of Competition. So he's exquisitely qualified to discuss the UK perspective on AUKUS and the Indo Pacific. Thank you for joining us, Alessio.
Ambassador, thank you very much for the kind and generous introduction. Today, what I'd like to do is to cast a sort of wider net as to what is the UK, what is AUKUS to the UK, and why the UK has been part of the dynamics and the negotiations that led to AUKUS. Because in many respects, the UK is very symptomatic of a much growing and stronger debate in Europe that relates to the question of how should Europe, in a broader sense, or to what extent the Indo-Pacific region matters to Europe and matters to European security. The 3 points I want to make will sort of draw upon the very recently completed integrated review of defense and security matters here in the UK that was published last March. And so it draws upon, if you want, a significant process of rethinking British defense and security, and in particular, one of the key elements that emerged from the integrated review was the specific reference to the Indo-Pacific, in particular this recalibration, also known as the Indo-Pacific tilt, in which for the first time since the defense reviews process as documents published periodically by the British government have been established, this is the first time that the British government is actually clearly sort of relating to the Indo-Pacific. And AUKUS became 2 months ago the first really sort of the first deliverable within this context of what does it mean the Indo-Pacific to the UK. So within this context, when we think about the importance of AUKUS, I think there's 3 points that one should sort of start of thinking about. First of all, AUKUS is about a shared worldview, one in which the UK, among other European actors engaging with the Indo-Pacific, is clearly stated that there's a recognition that the return of geopolitical competition and state-on-state competition is the new sort of structural feature of international relations. That's number one. And within this context, however, there is also recognition of the intrinsic maritime nature of that competition. This is the first time that among major powers, the key hotspots of competition are at sea and not on land. So in one sense, there is a recognition of a geopolitical shift, but does that matter to the UK, a tiny group of islands offshore the coast of Western Europe? Yes, it does, because in terms of the connectivity and the prosperity that sort of underwrites international trade and development, the Indo-Pacific is becoming an increasingly important feature also for the British economy, something that has been reinforced in the post-Brexit conditions. And this is not to state that Britain is leaving the EU in search for opportunities elsewhere. It's simply a statement of the fact there is a new recognized freedom to engage more in other parts of the world, which were already increasing in terms of importance to the UK. So on one hand, you have this understanding, this recognition of maritime geopolitics, if you want, at the strategic level, and at the same time, the specific importance that the Indo-Pacific has in terms of through connectivity, and therefore the sort of the stability and the order of the maritime domain to the UK, and the particular meaning that the Indo-Pacific has in it. This leads to my second point, because this recognition comes also with a second sort of, if you want, a significant change brought about by the integrated review. And that is the link, a rethink of the link between prosperity and security. The review made it very clear that there is no prosperity without security. And if the Indo-Pacific matters more to the UK for the reasons mentioned before, the stability and the security of the sort of maritime domains in the Indo-Pacific matter to the UK. And AUKUS in this respect is a very specific statement about that important recognition. It's about taking a very important step to clearly side with Australia, responding to a call for help in the conditions that have considerably changed. And Ashley's point about the changes in the estimates in Australia about security are very much at the heart of how the UK took very seriously the initial contact from Australian counterparts in the Australian Navy to the First Sea Lord in regards to this question of pursuing the nuclear submarines, because underwater capabilities will play a significant role in underwriting the security piece of that broader prosperity element. But at the same time, I think it needs to be placed into a broader context. AUKUS is a significant step to address a specific issue related to this matter of how security underwrites prosperity. But at the same time, it needs to be seen as part of a broader set of, if you want, activities launched by the UK in regards to the broader Indo Pacific. Recently, the UK has become an ASEAN dialogue member partner, has also applied for CPTPP, and it's been very interesting in looking at the conversation over RSIS. So both politically and economically, the UK has been very active in that part of the world, and also talks about growing interest in London about the Quads, really speaks to this broader piece that the Indo-Pacific is to the UK. This is not the UK trying to make a statement about containing China. It's about putting your foot down on things that needs to be, upon which one needs to push back. And so in that sense, because there is no prosperity without security. So first point is about the recognition of geopolitics. The second one is the recognition that there is no prosperity without security. And this leads to a third point, because as AUKUS was being rolled out, of course, you still had Carrier Strike Group 21, the maiden voyage of the Queen Elizabeth, which was in the region about the same time conducting multi-carrier operations activities in the South China Sea. And at the same time, the first two OPVs, the offshore patrol vessels that are destined for the Indo-Pacific, were just crossing the Panama Canal, entering the Indo-Pacific. And that is symptomatic of that link between the military and constabulary dimensions of the Indo-Pacific, that again relate to AUKUS in the sense that there is a recognition in London that the core of the issues in the broader Indo-Pacific are in one sense strategic, and talk to that Sino-American competition at the structural level of international relations. But on the other is also about governance and maritime order and maritime stability. And so both need to be addressed. One is about an operational balance in the theaters and sub-theaters in the region. The other one is about a behavioral balance, how you show others that a certain type of behavior is not acceptable. And that matters because the maritime domain becomes, if you want, a lighthouse, a guide towards other domains in which the rules of the game, the broader frameworks in tech, quantum, artificial intelligence, space, cyber are not fully defined yet. So making a statement that addresses both the strategic and governance of the dimension is very important. And AUKUS really addresses that strategic dimension in two ways. One, it's a down payment towards rebalancing that ever decreasing balance, or if you want, a stability at the operational level in the strategic dimension that Ashley mentioned moments ago, but at the same time, showing the complementary nature of the UK contribution to the stability of the Indo-Pacific, which is not just in the high end of the spectrum, as CSG was doing, but is also in that constabulary governance order related piece, which is complementary to other actors and might actually create opportunities in which the UK plays to its strengths as a convening power, freeing the opportunities of other actors in the region to use their own assets for other things. So to conclude, 3 points. From a UK perspective, AUKUS is symptomatic. It's the first deliverable of the Indo-Pacific Tilt, part of the integrated review, which in turn is a recognition of a change in international geopolitics, and the change of understanding in international geopolitics that requires the UK to engage with the problem that there is no prosperity without security. And even though containment China is not the ambition, certainly pushing back when it's needed particularly in the maritime domain, is essential. And then also an indication of how the UK will not try to promise too much and under-deliver, but rather focus on its complementarity and its niche capabilities could contribute to that sort of broader stability in the region. On this note, I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alessio, for that great presentation. I was interested to see that the UK didn't just send an aircraft carrier. They dispatched a whole strike group to the Western Pacific. Can you expand a little further on the composition of that strike group and where it went and what it did?
Thank you so much for this question, because really it speaks very much to 2 points I was making. One, this idea of complementarity, and another one sort of links up with the point that Ashley also was making about one of the key advantages of the United States and its partners is going to be the ability to increasingly work together and take interoperability to the next level, interchangeability. And Carrier Strike Group 21 is the first example in a region in which there is no NATO, there is no standing naval group, there is no comparable military machine, coalition basis that is a standing sort of reality that can be mobilized, right? So in a region in which you don't have that equivalent, CSG 21 showed what kind of different models exist out there and what interchangeability as a higher level of interoperability could look like in the future. And the composition is very symptomatic. The air wing on the carrier is a combined US Marine Corps and Royal Navy air wing. And again, you cannot have an air wing unless you have the utmost trust with your partner, because operating jets and sort of is about revealing the most sensitive elements of your doctrine, of your doctrinal grammar, the operating procedures, as well as the nature of the capabilities at your disposal. So that will not happen unless you have a level of trust that allows you to fully integrate and interchange with each other. But at the same time, the supporting vessels included also a US Navy destroyer and a Dutch frigate, which really is symptomatic of the fact that it's a statement about the fact this isn't just about the United States and the UK. This is something that can be achieved with trusted partners and allies. And it is, I think, not a coincidence that during the exercises in mid-September in the South China Sea, there was a Japanese flat top that was part of the conversation there. And at the same time, off the coast of Japan, JS Izumo was doing the first test flights for the F-35Bs. So that sort of composition, that point about CSG 21 is about showcasing a model of interoperability that can empower the United States and its partners in their part of the world without necessarily having alliances of NATO style, which are impossible to have. They showcases an alternative model, one that takes cooperation and practical getting together to a next level, one that sort of focuses on the output rather than the frameworks above it.
Thank you. Just one more question. My understanding is that Australia and the UK are related in defense terms through the five-power defense agreement, but they're not, strictly speaking, allies. This is not based on an alliance between the UK and Australia. Is that right?
That is correct, although there is also the Five Eyes agreement. And
Yes.
Again, these are frameworks then you will not have, particularly the Five Eyes, you will not have in place unless there is a level of trust between the partners. That even though, put it this way, the only reason why they're not allies is that because there is no formal arrangement that includes mutual defense and Article 5 style type of clause. But short of that, in terms of the necessary mutual understanding and sharing, the level of proximity is one of the highest caliber, and is also one that is bound to increase, because it's not just about the submarine cooperation. There is also the next generation frigates for the Australian Navy, that will be provided by the UK. So, as I always say, the CSG 23 or 25 might very well have also a Japanese and Australian flags in it. I wouldn't be surprised by that. And I think indeed that should be something to look forward to.
Thank you very much, Alessio. For the regional perspective, for the ASEAN perspective, and hopefully for the Singaporean perspective as well, I'd like to turn now to Ambassador Yong, who is Executive Deputy Chairman of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS, at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He's also Director of the Institute of Defense Studies at RSIS, and Ambassador Ong continues to hold the position of Ambassador at Large at the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ambassador, and we look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dave. I hope all of you can hear me well. Well,
loud and clear.
After listening to the two preceding speakers, I would just start by saying that the issue of AUKUS is of particular interest to people in Southeast Asia. If you look at the geography of Southeast Asia and also the history of Southeast Asia, recent history, the last 30, 40 years. Yeah. So if you look at the geography of Southeast Asia, we are almost in the middle of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And if you look at the historical development, the presence of the United States of America in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, and the engagement with the rest of the countries in the region have been always particularly interesting to people in our part of the world. So when the announcement on AUKUS came about, there was, of course, a great deal of renewed anxiety. In the recent years, we have also seen the activism of China and India in moving around the region, and their presence in the economy of our region is also very visible. So the questions that people have raised, the media have touched on, have basically revolved around what this all mean for the overall arrangement which ASEAN as a regional organization in Southeast Asia has promoted over the past 50 years. ASEAN is not a stranger to the interplay of the major powers in our region, their interests in geopolitics, in economy, and in strategic dimension, which Professor Alessio have just touched on. The interesting thing is that ASEAN member states have thought that they, through the past 50 years, have managed the transition from what is obviously a very tense global kind of competition between the East and West, and the concentration is on the economic development and the development of our respective countries in Southeast Asia with the big neighbor China and India. So when news came about this AUKUS, there has been a lot of debate among the intellectuals, among the policy guys, and I think many of the elements which Ashley and Alessio have touched on have not really come out in those ways as articulated by two experts. So there is a lot of what I call misunderstanding and anxiety. And of course, in the background, there is this relationship with China, which all ASEAN member states have. You know, all the ASEAN member states consider China a very important trade partner, and the facts show that China is a major partner, trading partner of all, or individually, all the ASEAN member states. So there is this scrutiny in the media and in policy circle, what this new formation called AUKUS means for the overall regional security relationship. The other point is that ASEAN has, over the past 20 years, developed a blueprint for what we call the ASEAN community. The ASEAN community revolves around what Alessio said about geopolitics, about economics, about social, cultural, and broader people sector development. So the understanding now is that the ASEAN countries are focused on managing such kind of developments in the hope that the bigger countries like China and India will participate in a more active and constructive way. However, in recent years, because of the competing claims in the South China Sea, tensions have started to go up. And in the recent month, because of the US-China competition, tensions that we have seen in recent years in our region have also gone up due to this understanding that all this that's happening between China and the United States will also impact on regional security, regional economy, and regional society in our region. So, to summarize what has happened since the announcement in September about AUKUS, we now have seen articulation from Malaysia and Indonesia about what they feel would be the immediate effect of AUKUS. There is concern that we are going to see more of an arms race. There will be more of a nuclear proliferation, quote unquote, and there will be triggering off of rivalries and counter moves in Southeast Asian regional context because of our proximity, geographical proximity to China, India, Australia. Yeah, so many different government officials and political appointees have made different statements. But overall, I think the situation is such that we are seeing the debate ongoing, and we are not sure how things will evolve over the coming months. So I think currently the ASEAN member states are talking among themselves and hoping that there can be more clarity as we go along. As far as Singapore is concerned, we have been very active with regard to the presence of external powers, external countries interested in our region. So what we are seeing today is a balance in public statements from Singaporean leaders. The Prime Minister of Singapore have generally made some positive statements in public. So far, his statements have been shared by countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines, or I should say that Singapore Prime Minister's statements are also reflected in the comments of the Filipino ministers as well as the Vietnamese officials, including their political leaders. If you look at the ASEAN situation, you can say that basically there is unhappiness in Malaysia and Indonesia about the AUKUS announcement. The Philippines, the Vietnamese, and Singapore, we tend to take a more long-term regional perspective and look at the reality of the situation. And basically, if I can sum up in one sentence, those who have been more welcoming of what they have heard so far are waiting for more details and see how things evolve in the coming months. Of course, there is this element of China's reaction, and generally we in ASEAN are trying to manage this. We do not wish that the Chinese believe that ASEAN countries are taking side either for or against AUKUS. Yeah. So far, in some of the regional interaction, the commentaries on both sides have been relatively measured. Yeah, but I do not know how going forward these things will develop. But what is important is that there is the need for more clarity as we go forward. Of course, in the media, in the public eyes, the controversy between Australia and France over the submarine deal has attracted a lot of public attention. Most people in Southeast Asia love all this kind of drama and disagreement between big countries like France and UK, or now France and Australia. And of course, the debate between US and France will continue. And Australia and New Zealand leaders have been featured in the last 24 hours about what had been said and what had not been said, blah, blah, blah. So we in ASEAN basically will just watch this and hope that those of us who are more positive towards this development will contribute to a more constructive debate or discussion, and we will see how things evolve in the coming months. I will stop here, Dave, and wait for your questions and other comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Great presentation. Everyone particularly in the 2+2 statement issued by the US and Australia on September 16th, made a point of referencing the importance of ASEAN centrality and the importance of ASEAN in the maintenance of peace and stability in the region. On the other hand, others in the region have been critical, not only of AUKUS, but of the Quad arrangement among the US, Japan, Australia, and India, arguing that these are likely to diminish ASEAN centrality and diminish ASEAN's role in regional diplomacy. What's your take on that? Is this really going to negatively affect ASEAN centrality?
Well, there will always be some impact, definitely, because the concept of ASEAN centrality is still not very well understood by different segments of our population, different segments of the international opinion. So depending on how you see ASEAN centrality, you either say, oh, this is going to be very bad, or, oh, all right, something will have to give, for the sake of what we call interplay of major power interests in Southeast Asia, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So far, I would say that most Singaporeans or those of us in ASEAN who have been following ASEAN centrality and the role of ASEAN as a regional body, trying to ensure peace and economic development, take the view that there is going to be some need for explanation, need for rationalization, need to discuss how the specific details will affect this or that. So we wait and see. Yeah. Overall, the leadership in ASEAN has taken the stand that there will be some impact. The question is, how do we manage these negatives? Yeah. The impact revolve around basically the perception that there is going to be more and more what we call here in our region minilateral formations, small groups of the willing government working together. So you have heard about Quad, which consists of Japan, India, Australia, working together with the bigger countries, the big powers that are already operating in our area. So we will see how, but this brings us to the point about ASEAN government needing to go out there and explain their notion of ASEAN centrality and what this means for the future of ASEAN-led mechanism, which contribute to this open and inclusive regional setting where big powers around the world have come and regional countries have used this kind of opportunity to interact and to preserve their respective political strategic interests.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Just one more question. I was reminded today that within the past year or two, maybe Australia and Singapore concluded the Australia-Singapore Military Training Initiative, on the basis of which I believe Singapore agreed to invest in the enhancement of Australian training facilities and expand its own activities, military activities in Australia. How will AUKUS and the expansion of US-Australian defense cooperation affect your defense relationship with Australia? And do you expect to build on the military training initiative? Did we lose the ambassador? Okay, I'll reserve that question for later on in the program if he can rejoin us. Meanwhile, I'd like to ask Dr. Thomas Fingar to provide us with his view on how the Chinese have reacted to AUKUS. Tom is the Shorenstein APARC fellow in the Freeman Spogli Institute at Stanford University. He was the inaugural Oxenberg-Rowland Distinguished Fellow from 2010 to 2015, and the Payne Distinguished Lecturer at Stanford in 2009. Tom also has a long and distinguished career as a regional analyst and as a China analyst in the State Department. And as I said, he was one of my China gurus when I was during my career as a Foreign Service officer. So I'm delighted that Tom could join us tonight. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Dave, for the invitation to participate and for the introduction. That I've learned a lot from the previous speakers. That what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is to characterize China's reaction to the announcements that have been discussed already, the September decisions, summarize briefly the points made in those statements, and then finally take a shot at explaining why Beijing reacted as it has. Let me start with the reaction. Foreign coverage, academic coverage, talking head coverage of China's reaction has been much more exaggerated, hand-wringing, excited than my reading of what the Chinese have actually said. That the Chinese hate this, they fear it, they must respond. That's not the way I read the reactions. Indeed, I'd characterize them as minimalist, as muted. Couldn't ignore the development, but they certainly haven't hyped it. And they appear to have attempted to not raise the profile and to get it off stage as quickly as possible. To my knowledge, I certainly have not seen any authoritative editorials any high-level commentator articles, any statements by high-level officials. I think the highest level has been the press spokesman for the foreign ministry, Zhao Lijian, and statements by ambassadors posted abroad. There is no wolf warrior diplomacy apparent in any of these statements. That it gives the impression of, I know I have to say something, but please don't ask me any questions, and let's go on to another topic. The coverage in official media, the Xinhua News Service, People's Daily, Global Times, has also been muted. It mostly cites foreign commentary, what academics or mostly mid-level officials in the region have said selectively, and the notable absence of commentary from within the PRC. I thought I noticed one academic cited. Predictably, the Global Times is the most extreme. That comes close to posing a military threat to Australia, but it stands out as the outlier that it normally is. But what did Beijing actually say about this cluster of agreements? One to begin with something, the dog that didn't bark, something that they don't see. They don't hype, they don't even acknowledge that this is a threat to China. That the three signatory nations, wisely, in my view, did not declare that this was directed at China or anybody else. And in response to questions, they continue to say this is not directed at any one country, not even naming China as the country to which it is not directed. That creates some space. It makes it easier for Beijing not to respond. And I think it caused officials to greet it with a degree of relief, as I'll explain in a moment. They certainly did not characterize, acknowledge, suggest that what the US, UK, and Australia have done is in any way a response to PRC activities, military buildup, more assertive behavior in the region. It's characterized as, there they go again, these prudent foreign countries doing things that destabilize the region. The key points in it are, first of all, emphasizing the threat to regional peace and stability. There's no singling out of this as a special problem for China. It threatens the region. That they don't really elaborate as to why or how it threatens regional peace and stability. But that's the tack that they've taken, and that was the first point made in the foreign ministry statement and in the authoritative press statements. The commentary about the threat to regional peace is almost entirely put in the mouths of foreign commentators. The Chinese typically do this when they want to have an arm's length distance from the views. And we didn't say that. One of the people they quote is Hugh White. Hugh White in Australia mentioned this as a risky undertaking. That there are no explicit statements by serving officials, former officials, academic specialists, think tanks, The second point that it makes is that these actions intensify arms races. But what those arms races involve is not specified. That the examples suggest that other countries in East Asia will be building arms in a kind of an arms race, but explicitly does not say that China will respond in a way that could be construed as an arms race. But it doesn't repeat the formulaic denial that China engages in or ever would engage in an arms race. Maybe we are supposed to assume that they're holding that out as a possibility. The third, and to me the most interesting point made, and the one that is made most often in the materials I've read, is this undermines the international non-proliferation regime, non-proliferation efforts. That the way this is done deliberately attempts to blur the distinction between nuclear weapons and nuclear power. Nuclear powered submarines being implied that these are also nuclear weapons carriers. This is probably an effort to play to New Zealand and its anti-nuclear position. It may be an argument that they think will get some traction with other signatories outside of the region to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by trying to make the case that the US and the UK have violated their obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So this one I put in the watch this space. The argument may be elaborated. And finally, and very briefly, what accounts for the PRC response? Why did they adopt such a minimalist and muted approach? I think the primary explanation is they were eager not to spin up domestic audiences. That it's hard for me to imagine how they could comment on this very much without raising the question, among the questions it raises, is who lost Australia? Who thought it was a good idea to put the kind of pressure on Australia, make the kind of demands of Australia that the government has made over the last year or so, to bring the US, the UK into the region in a way that is different? That it's hard for me to imagine a low-risk way of calling to attention to that by the government without raising questions about the wisdom of the wolf warrior kind of diplomacy, the wisdom of the more assertive displays of military power, the more boisterous declarations of China's power and how no one should trifle with the People's Republic. That the Chinese don't really describe it as an alliance, which that kind of surprised me. So parties did not describe it in that way on it. But again, there's to me, an effort to play down the idea that these developments are a problem for China, to which China must respond in some way. Economically, militarily, politically, diplomatically. It's sort of, this happened, we thought you'd like to know, and let's go on to something else. I think they're very reluctant to prompt social media demands for a harsh response. That the two-edged sword of social media, that's good for spreading propaganda, but facilitates almost instantaneous communication of ideas, and did not, in my view, wish to provoke calls from the very patriotic, nationalistic population, particularly the less than 45-year-old segment of the population that is know only a progressively richer and stronger China with the How could you let this happen? What are you going to do about it? That would box in the government and the party and appear to be critical of Xi Jinping. The final two observations are that the Chinese think tank types who've had much to say about the impact of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan on our allies, undermining confidence in our allies. And that was a leitmotif of a lot. And this agreement is sort of coming on the wake of the very ugly departure from Afghanistan, is a new alignment, a deeper alignment of the US with longstanding formal allies. But the answer to the erosion of confidence is we're going to do even more with the Americans. And finally, there was a short-lived and predictable attempt to play upon mostly US-French tension because of the cancellation of the diesel-powered subs. That was abandoned pretty quick, I guess, because it obviously didn't get any traction. But let me stop there, and thanks for the opportunity to address this tough question.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'll have you know that I considered inviting a Chinese panelist, but I thought it would be very interesting to hear what a seasoned observer of Chinese media and official statements would have to say about the Chinese reaction. So, and I think that was extremely illuminating and useful for us all. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Well, you certainly know a lot about China as well. Did it make sense to you?
Just one question. We've been led to believe by the Western press that wolf warrior diplomacy is the new default for Chinese diplomacy around the world. And your analysis of the Chinese reaction suggests that that may not be the case. Have we seen the high tide of wolf warrior diplomacy? Are we likely to see more of it? Have the Chinese learned their lesson? Or is this just another expression of how the Chinese calibrate their responses to events in the world?
Well, I think the calibration is really the most important point. That I must say I am of a divided opinion on wolf warrior diplomacy. I think it is so counterproductive for China that as a former US official, I hope they don't stop. That it's an asset to everybody except China. But the background to the calibration analysis is, it's now a couple of months since Xi is reported to have directed to back off on wolf warrior diplomacy. And interestingly, questioning of whether that directive would actually be followed, in part because of what gets Chinese diplomats promoted, or their perception of what they need to do to get promoted, but simply raising the question about whether people would listen to the head of the party and the head of the state is interesting. I suspect that in this case, though, the calibration was made at high level and a reinforcing instruction went out that this is not the subject for wolf warrior diplomacy. So if you were even thinking about going in that direction, think again and don't do it. That, again, almost everything that I've seen is appeared directed at an external audience and trying to minimize the dangers of, call it nationalistic individuals and groups within China demanding action for these developments.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I'd like to return to my question for Ambassador Yong. He was unfortunately cut off briefly as I asked my question. I'd like to return to it. Are you with us, Ambassador Yong?
Yeah, Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you very much. Returning to your presentation, as I said earlier, I was reminded today that within the past couple of years, recently, I think, Australia and Singapore concluded an agreement on whereby Singapore would invest in enhancements in Australian training areas, I think primarily in Queensland, and expand its activities, the activities of its own military in those training areas. Has the expansion of US-Australian cooperation and AUKUS affected the way in which you view your defense relationship with Australia? Do you expect to expand it further? Tell us about it.
Well, the short answer is I do not think so. Yeah, things are still evolving. So, many more details will come clearer in the coming months. But as far as Australia and Singapore are concerned, our relationship is actually our military training relationship and our broader defense relationship are actually quite independent of whatever happened on the broader level with the bigger countries and with the US in the region or with the Chinese reaction to US policy in the region. Australia and Singapore, we have very strong history. We have worked together on many projects, and over the years, we are thankful to the Australian government for allowing our Singaporean soldiers to train in Australia. So I do not see this thing being affected by what has happened. Yeah, and I believe that the plan for upgrading some of the infrastructure and to reform some of the arrangements will continue. Yeah. Just now we touched a bit about the five-power defense arrangement which Singapore, Malaysia have with Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. This is the 50th anniversary of this FPDA, five-power defense arrangement. It has served the five countries very well in the last 5 decades, and the celebration and commemoration of the 50th anniversary are still going on in different parts of the 5 nations involved. So we see more substantive feature coming up, yeah, especially with regard to training and coordinating of our respective military outlook and cooperation with others outside the five-power defense arrangement. So I can only say that even though I don't have all the details, but the defense and military cooperation between Australia and New Zealand will continue. In fact, I think it will become more and more intensified. But I don't think this has an impact on what AUKUS is working through. And I don't think the other bigger countries involved in AUKUS and its aftermath will have any significant impact on our Australia-Singapore relations.
I must say that Singapore also uses training facilities. The Singaporean military also uses multiple training facilities in the United States, mostly in the West, and I believe more recently on Guam. So we really appreciate Singapore's attention to balance in the region.
Thank you. I think Singapore, as you know, is only a small little red dot on the map. And our defense doctrine and defense training require vast spaces. Yeah. So I think we are thankful that on the US side, on the Australian side, and the traditional five-power defense ties have allowed us to continue our training options abroad. Overall, we want to contribute to regional stability, security, and I like what some of the preceding speakers have said about the multi-dimensional consideration underlying all these recent development, especially AUKUS. And I think there is a need for more information to be shared, to be disseminated, to understand the defensive nature and the multilateral cooperative nature of some of these new arrangement or formation we are seeing in the region. Yeah, it is ready for a longer term partnership. And as I hear the preceding speaker, the other aspect of the relationship between regional countries and the bigger countries from outside the region should be viewed more comprehensively.
Thank you very much. I have a question before we turn to the questions submitted by the audience, I have one more question for Ash, if that's all right. Can you join us, Ash? I'm just wondering, and for Alessio as well, I'm just wondering, going back to what Dr. Fingar said about the Chinese reaction. Are either of you aware of a Chinese démarche on the subject of AUKUS to your governments? And if so, can you talk about it?
So I'm not aware of a Chinese démarche to the Australian government. And in fact, Tom's comments, I think, were absolutely spot on from my perspective. China's reaction, at least insofar as lumping pressure on Australia is concerned, has been minimal compared with the nearly 2 years of intense economic coercion, disinformation, high-level diplomatic freeze-out that China has inflicted on Australia, and really which intensified on the back of Australia's call for an international inquiry into the outbreak of COVID-19 last year, but whose antecedents extend really to 2017 and the beginnings of Australia really starting to take steps to bolster its own resilience, to prevent foreign interference and espionage in this country, to route out interference in our grids, in our networks, to reduce the space for Chinese companies to be major partners in the technological sphere, and so on and so forth in Australia, as well as our stance on issues like the South China Sea, in direct support of claimant nations, in direct support of the 2016 ruling. These are the real issues that have led to China inflicting pressure on Australia. The AUKUS agreement itself, to Tom's point, I think it was, Beijing's question, who lost Australia, which I think is exactly the way that they'll be pondering this right now. The AUKUS is the cherry on the cake of Australia's response in many ways, and so we haven't seen any direct efforts. What we have seen, though, and I think what worries folks in Australia perhaps more than some others, is the way that we've seen China trying to ringlead an ASEAN counter to AUKUS, or at least amongst certain countries, as Ambassador Ong discussed earlier, when it comes to, in particular, Malaysia and Indonesia, and in particular the foreign ministries in those countries, stoking concerns there, raising the profile above reality when it comes to issues like arms racing and issues like proliferation in the region, which are very much disingenuous arguments. We have seen China engage in that and understand that they've engaged in that privately in a quite substantial way. So although that's not wolf warrior diplomacy, it's actually far more insidious if that's the case, and something which is perhaps more difficult to respond to, and certainly is in part the motivation of our foreign minister's forthcoming trip to Southeast Asia next week.
Alessio, any reaction?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree with Ash. And well, when Tom was talking, I found myself nodding so hard that I almost hurt my neck, because I completely agree with the assessment that by Chinese standards, the reaction was very muted. I mean, you know, it went hardly beyond what you would have expected the various spokespersons to talk about. And certainly here, you haven't seen anything particularly striking. But it must be said that in the UK, general perception of China, and here it's interesting to see the sort of the difference and the convergence with the situation in Australia, because of course we haven't been at the sharp receiving end of coercive actions by China in the UK. However, perception of China last year and this year has considerably dropped in terms of public perception. We have a couple of reports that are published annually in terms of public perception of foreign policy. And one of the things that has been quite remarkable is the disaster that COVID has brought about to Chinese image in the UK. When you combine that with other factors such as Chinese conduct in Xinjiang, increased pressure in Taiwan, and of course, above all else, the way in which the Chinese have gently but steadily and ever so increasingly trashed out of the window the joint statement on Hong Kong, these factors have contributed to completely destroy Chinese reputation. So in that sense, there's two stories. The Chinese story towards the UK, the golden era coming to an end, and certainly the Chinese were very displeased with the Johnson government decision on Huawei last year. But besides that, we haven't seen anything related to AUKUS. But on the other, I think the Chinese have been slightly less, if you want, reactive on AUKUS in particular, because they have seen and noticed a continuous, if you want, reduction in positive public perceptions in the UK. And you can see this across Parliament, whereby China has become today a factor that sort of brings together across the aisle different MPs, and both in the Defense Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, there is a general agreement that the Chinese behavior started with Hong Kong, continued with Xinjiang, and then throughout COVID has been much less than stellar. But other than that, the Chinese were paying much more attention to my understanding of the activities of CSG21 than AUKUS in particular. Uwe.
Alessio, so you think the Chinese have noticed the fall off in positive views about China in the UK and have again calibrated accordingly?
I think to an extent, I mean, it depends what we mean by calibration. But for example, I think when a few months back there was this backlash to European parliamentarians and in particular actions against German and French MPs and German and French academics, there was if you want, the UK also was in part sort of touched, but nobody in the government was sanctioned. It was MPs, certainly high-profile MPs, but I think here in London, it was understood as the Chinese trying to draw a distinction and therefore nuance their reaction to an evolving debate, which I think suggests that the Chinese kind of realize that what is happening is also generated by their own behavior. What I think is remarkable in this story is that the Chinese used to be much more, the previous ambassador in London was a very active person. He was very visible across the media, the main think tanks. It was always on a platform. You couldn't keep the man away from a camera. It was incredible. But that has changed considerably. The Chinese are not trying to make an effort in that sense. So I think the dynamics have changed. And what is the new normal? What a new normal looks like is still to be found. But certainly they have shown to be more nuanced in the way they behave and then sort of interact with official elements of the government and parliament here.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Kent Calder to this event. Kent is the founder of the Reischauer Center, and until very recently, the hardworking interim dean of SIS. Kent, I'm going to turn to your question in a minute, but before I do that, I'd like to address a question from Karen Lee, which is that the question is, the US currently lacks an ambassador in all of the panelists representative countries. How urgently do regional actors perceive the need to fill these vacancies? And do they have any opinions on the current nominees to those positions? I want to hear your opinions on the current nominees. Would anyone like to take that? I think we haven't had an ambassador in Singapore since 2017, actually.
Yeah, I think so. But you know, you are a professional career man before. You can see that, you know, maybe the professional guys are keeping the ball rolling and the shop running. But it is important to have a political appointee or a high-level ambassador to each of these countries. So I think this business of having ambassador must continue and be taken seriously by everybody.
Anyone else?
I'll comment briefly. You know, I have seen very, very little from China on the ambassador nominee, Nick Burns. He doesn't have two things which the Chinese have tended to look for and applaud in ambassadorial assignments. One is a particularly close relationship with the president. He's a career diplomat, has served in administrations of both parties, and he doesn't have not only not have a close relationship with China, has essentially no experience in dealing with China. So he doesn't come on board as what the Chinese would refer to as a friend of China. So there's a lot of discomfort because he doesn't fit the preferred template.
Interesting. Alessio, did you have a hand up?
Yes, I did very briefly. I mean, of course, I couldn't agree more with Ambassador Yong. You need a senior political appointee, and particularly given the importance of the transatlantic relations for the UK as a cornerstone of UK defence and security policy and foreign relations, that cannot be stressed enough. Having said so, though, I think this particular government, the Johnson government, has worked very hard to develop its own connections and ties straight with DC inside the Beltway with the White House, and particularly around the National Security Council in the United States. So in that sense, perhaps, as Ambassador Yong was saying, the working level relationship has been less affected than one would have imagined, in part because those relationships were there to nurture the ties. And again, AUKUS is a classic example of how the three governments, and in particular the UK, when it comes to the UK and the US, there was a straight, very strong coordination, and that coordination was run at the National Security Secretariat here and at the National Security Council in the United States. Those ties make up, if you want, in part, for the fact that you don't have an ambassador. But yes, it's absolutely important to have that legal representative.
Yes, before we close, thank you, Alessio. Before we close, I'd like to turn to Kent Calder's question, which is, what prospect does the panel see that Japan will be accepted into or be drawn into AUKUS? What capabilities does it have that would be attractive to the other maritime powers? Why don't I ask Ash to address that question?
Just briefly, the AUKUS framework, when it comes to the submarine purchase, is likely to be governed by a treaty, and the nature of that acquisition is that it was likely to be an exclusive one. But beyond that, there is no reason. AUKUS is not a fixed entity. It is, the acronym is probably given a lot more hype than it deserves. AUKUS countries, Australia, US, and the United Kingdom, already do and certainly would like to continue expanding high-end defense industrial ties, critical technology ties with a whole range of European countries, of course also with Japan. So it's less about the Japanese or European capabilities and more about the as yet unrealized capabilities that the inclusion of their industrial bases, their technical know-how and so forth, their innovation can bring to the party. And so in that sense, AUKUS is the beginning. It might end up being a hub for a whole series of ties in critical technology that will expand to a range of trusted allied and partner countries.
Thank you very much, Ash, and thank you to all of our panelists for a very interesting and illuminating conversation. And I certainly would like a ride on the new Australian attack submarine, whether it's an Astute class or a Virginia class.
I thought you were going to put up your hand for an ambassadorial appointment down here, Dave.
That'd be great. Send a letter to the White House, please. Thank you, everybody, and good night, and hope we can do this again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.